Hi, Hugo. And I would like to introduce, I don't know, I think most people know who he is, but Oscar Michael, the face of Africa community gaming. And I'll let each person kind of introduce themselves. Thank you. Oh, cool. Do we get a second mic, please? All right. Thank you. Nice to see you guys. All right. We'll start with brief introductions. So I'll start from the end. Oscar, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Pleasure to be here, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Oscar Michael, and I'm the founder of Africa Communicate. Africa Communicate is a launchpad for stakeholders in the African video games, immersive, and interactive media industry. And what we've built is a community of communities across Africa where people want to thrive in the industry, whether you want to grow as a developer, as a creative, or you want to grow and succeed as a founder, someone who is leading a game studio or any creative studio can get the support, the access to opportunities they are searching for, and build something sustainable for themselves and the sector. Yeah.
Thanks, Oscar. Hugo, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Good afternoon. So I run a mobile games development company called Malio Games. We're based here in Lagos, Nigeria. We focused on telling stories through the medium of video games. We think of ourselves as sharing African lived experiences with the world through games. There are about 36 of us now. We are, even though we're headquartered here in Lagos, we're spread across 5 African countries. We've been around since 2012. So we're one of the older players within the mobile games industry. Yeah, that's who we are.
Okay. For those who need to know anything about video games, Hugo is the market leader um, in our industry. So please, it's really good to have Hugo and Oscar here as well. So the topic is quite an interesting topic. I think it's something we've discussed quite a fair bit, and I think it's going to continue in terms of how we try to solve the problem. So the global games industry is a really, really massive industry. Is bigger than a combination of film, music, and you know some other entertainment sectors. It is, I believe, close to $180 billion. And the question is, how does Nigeria play in that global industry? So, from your experience, I'll start with Oscar. From your experience, um, how do you see, how can we compete, or how can we get our own piece of this global pie? Because, yeah, we've been in this industry for a minute, and it's. I suppose for people who don't know about the industry, it'll be good to get some context from you.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the question. I normally call it, I round it up to like $200 billion.
Yes,
So
yes, that's fine.
it's more enticing and it's easier for you to remember. So how can Nigeria or Africa, because I work more in the African context, I work with game development studios across Africa. And I think by 2022, 2023, the GDC did a survey, and currently Africa just makes up about 1% of game developers globally when you look at that. And if you look at data regarding the market, you see Nigerians' market is set to be generating like $500 million or so in respect to gaming. But then we do know that we are more, across Africa, we are more of a consumer market, where we are more playing games that is being created out there in the West or even in the East these days. Uh, that is what we do more. But that narrative is changing. Now we have game studios coming up, building games, and some are focused on telling our own stories from the African perspective, and some are of the perspective of just build games that are fun, because some players out there are not going out to say, oh, I want to play a Yoruba game or a Ghanaian game. They just want to play a fun game, a game that entertains, a game that allows them to connect and relax. And we're having more and more studios. I've spent over about a decade now in the industry, and I remember when I joined, there were just about maybe five, six, seven studios across sub-Saharan Africa mainly. But today we have about 100 indie game studios, if not more, coming up with different titles and trying to see how we can take a slice of this pie, trying to see how we can compete globally. And our game studios are, in the last 5 years of running Africa Communicate, they are doing well. They're going for global competitions and they are winning there. We had one VCD recently winning the Game Devs of Color Expo, which is not just for black or African game developers, but even Indians and the likes. It came out top, and many more studios pushing. So what has changed is the creatives, the game developers are more intentional about building studios. They're also more intentional about running these as a business, which is something that was missing when I joined. We're all driven by passion. But there's that common agreement now that passion is not going to take us further. Passion is not going to sustain us or give us those resources we need to compete globally. Because the games industry is a global market. You're not necessarily building games for Nigeria. And the stores you are publishing your games to, it's not like it's just for Nigeria. Your games are going on the app stores, and it's global competition there. It can be swallowed up completely. So that is changing. There's an orientation now to be more business oriented, and people are trying several strategies beyond even entertainment. And I think that's the most exciting part for me.
Thank you, Oscar. Hugo, on two sides actually, because yourself and Malio publish Africa Games reports, as well as clearly to Oscar's point, when you talk about making games, Malio is also a massive studio doing really interesting work. And so if you could kind of talk from both perspectives in terms of what you've seen and how possibly the industry can compete globally.
Yeah, I think there's a third one as well, which is the talent program that we run, just to kind of like complete that cycle. So the way that I see it is production, is distribution, and then there's monetization. But to enable all of those three things, you need people who are actually very good at making games. And I think that going back to when we started, it was really passion driven, like Michael said. A lot of like people who were just eager to make games and focused on the making games part. I think that awareness of the business side of making games is growing now, and people realize that it's not just about like coming up with like ideas and trying to make those ideas. It's also about the teams that are able to kind of like build those games. We recognize that Africa is the market. Like Michael again touched on the point that only 1% of the makeup of the video games development ecosystem are Africans, and that is reflective of the fact that we don't provide video games education. And we haven't traditionally provided video games education, and that hasn't been a career path for most people. So we started off doing the talent program because we recognized that if we were to make games, we needed people who could make games. And if we were not investing in people who could make games, then maybe our chances or odds of succeeding in making games would be very slim. So we started making that investment back in 2020 to kind of like build that next generation of talent. And today we're seeing people who've come through that program working in studios. We've seen people who come through that program running their own studios. We've seen people who've come through that program even helping other people to learn how to make games, which I think is kind of like really great. And we didn't just do that in the Nigerian context, we did that in the Pan-African context. So that net effect is taking place now. And I think like that's really wonderful. And that was part of the goal that I had, which is, like enabling or building the kind of like foundation within which the industry is then built upon. So that's base one. Base two is the content. So now you have talented people. What are they making? And it's always a challenge. And I don't think this challenge is limited to us as game developers. I think in music, in film, in animation is the same. Like who do you make for, right? Do you make for your, like who do you make for? Do you make for people around you? Do you make for the world? And I think it's not one or the other. I think it's a mixture, right? And I think that people are on a different journey. I think the most important thing, again, to Michael's point, is that we need to make great games. And great games are just great games. They're not Nigerian games. They're not, Scandinavian games. They're just great games for starters. before you even start to recognize or understand the people who made those games, or what cultures those games are portraying. So I think like that is still fundamental, is that we are able to make great games. But then there is a question of like what makes a game great. Just because like you've labeled it as a AAA production doesn't make it great. We've seen AAA flops. Just because it's a high budget production doesn't make it great. We've seen high production flop. Just because it was made by one individual also doesn't make it great. We've seen multiple of those. So, like by market definition, it's really about market success. That's what makes a great game. And that is the next frontier for us, is to kind of like get that market success. And, I've been privileged to like connect with multiple ecosystems around the world. And one unique attribute about those ecosystems is that you can reference the game that ecosystem has created, and people go like, oh, I know that game. Is that studio from here? And then it's like, wow, you guys actually have a mature market. And I think that until the day that we can go anywhere, I mean, similar to our music or even our football. So if you look at that music effect of like, oh, Burna Boy is from Nigeria, wow. People instantly recognize, and then they say, oh, you must have a really good, like music industry. And up until the point where you accomplish that, people still think that your industry is not mature. And then you also then have the net catalyzing effect of having that kind of like breakout success. And I think that once we start to see that, then more and more people get into the industry, then, like that ripple effect just naturally takes place. And then the last point was around the report that we put together on the games industry on the continent. And part of the reason why we did that was, first of all, the reason why we did it for the continent rather than do it for Nigeria is because there are very few good game studios in most countries across the continent. So doing a specific country-specific report wasn't going to be impactful enough. So we had to aggregate the data across the continent. So when Michael mentioned 100 studios, he wasn't talking about Nigeria. He was talking about Africa as a whole. So you can then imagine that maybe we have 10 or 15 or 20 in Nigeria, and it's not enough to build a report around. So we had to kind of like do that kind of like macro look rather than the sort of like individual country look. And then the reason why we put together the report was because we tried to sell this industry to various stakeholders, not just to ourselves, but to internationals, to non-gaming folks, to the media, other people in media, film, music. But most people do not understand anything about the market, and we don't necessarily articulate best the market to those externals. So we wanted to put together a comprehensive document that at least created some kind of like mapping of, back to Michael's point, how many studios exist, what types of games are they making, how long have they been making games, like is there any breakout success yet, but also documenting and archiving, because I feel like ours is a developing story, and maybe in 2 or 3 years' time, we will become successful. And it's not let it not be that it's only when we've blown that we will now start documenting. Let's start documenting before we blow, so that people can say, these people in 2023, they hadn't done anything. No, look at the transformation over a short period of time, and we just keep that document. And the beautiful thing about documents is that you can try to delete them, but they can never be deleted. They're always somewhere. But I think that that's the beauty, because as we start to transform, again, 100 studios, maybe 100 studios today, 300 studios, 500 studios, no breakout hits, like 10, 50, like multi-billion-dollar companies doing JVs, as that starts to happen, at least we're keeping that record, because it's really important for me that as we build, and then this is the other thing that I think is also very important. Most of us came and saw Nollywood, but we weren't there when Nollywood was being built, like the kind of like basic, like bricks that formed it. We saw the same thing with music. We kind of like knew when it was happening, but we weren't keeping track. I think that with games, we need to kind of like keep track and keep a record, so that when we need to build the next industry that we don't have today, we can at least go and say, those people, they kept documentation of how they built their own. Oh, let's go and read it and then use it to then build the next. So I think that's also very important.
Yeah, thanks, Hugo. You've mentioned some really valid points. To follow up on that, there are two things I picked up from your conversation. One is we need to have the breakthrough success, and then the question is, how? And oh God, when? The second thing is, like you mentioned, Is it important for us to compete globally to get involved in the value chain? Is it important that we look at ourselves from an Africa perspective versus a Nigeria only perspective?
This is this has to be treated on a case by case basis. Every studio has their visions and their goals, and some people are okay just being in this local context, doing what they do, while some have grand visions of scaling. And so this is how I would rather approach this, because I've spoken with a couple of game studio founders, and what everybody is looking out for, what that term global hit means to each one is different. But what I would love to say is, if you are a game studio founder, uh, look at it from the perspective of being a game studio founder, from a global perspective. The African market is still being developed. Regardless of that, Africans are playing games. Yes, and they are playing global games, right? So if we're saying from the African perspective, if you even look at Nollywood, for example, because I followed some of the journey while they were developing. Look at Iroko. Iroko was pushing African films and the likes, but its paying customers were not the Africans, but those who were helping it survive and grow and scale were the Africans in the diaspora. So I would say whatever we're doing, we should think global, knowing that we need to get own our market, but then also we need to think globally at the same time to get a chunk of that market as well. Because even the West, they are looking at our market as the next frontier. We're going to be having the youngest youth population in about in by I mean, it's going to double by 50% in the next couple of years. And never ever have we had this opportunity where the youths are willing to pay for such digital services, and then they are also medium for them to actually pay. Back then, if you wanted to buy a game or pay for anything, movies, the means is not even there, even though it was very expensive. I mean, when I realized the DVDs I were buying at 200 naira back then were not the original DVDs, you can imagine the shock. But now, if you actually want to pay legally for services, the means is there. And then the Gen Zs, they have a good culture of actually paying for these services, subscribing and the likes. We millennials, it's still like 50-50. Some do pay for Netflix, some share password. Right? But the Gen Zs really have that culture. And so this is a huge opportunity for us. And so we have to think of how we can own our market, create something that people in our market will be interested in getting, but also think globally as well, knowing that even in terms of nationality, that has changed. In terms of identity, a 7-year-old might be Nigerian today, and in the next 10 years, he's American. And that's how he sees himself. So the world is changing. We have to think in that route as well and think global.
Thank you, Oscar. I have a question for the audience. Just show of hands. I play video games. Okay. All right. All right.
That includes Scrabble,
Ludo what?
I play Candy Crush. Somewhere so. No. I was reading one stats today. I was humbled. Township. And when I was looking at their stats this morning, I was just like 8 billion or something or $8 million in what's that, a monthly revenue figure, something random. It's like See, this is personal testimonial. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people a lot of people that get into township actually get into it because of the ads and the casual games market, and there are different genres, but the casual games market is, you know, ads are a prevalent way or the main kind of business model in terms of recruitment. Anyway, so back to the question of obviously, clearly, all the games you play, until we said Ludo and Scrabble, although I don't know that Scrabble is local to us, but it's not like you guys are not choosing to play games because it's from Lagos or from your village, or it is what's the name of this? Let me not mention that character before you know my age. Anyway, so the idea that something for us to be successful in the games industry needs to be influenced by culture, is that a myth, Hugo?
I don't know. I think that in our world, it's data. So we are releasing 3 games. We've actually released 2. We have a third one coming next month. And we're trying to prove this point. So the 3 games are quite distinct. We have a word game, which is a word game, which is like Scrabble. It's not a Nigerian game. We have a Ludo game, which you could argue is popular in this region, but also popular in Asia. And then we have a property renovation game, which is like Township, but not quite. So it's got a beautiful, it's got a local narrative arc where you take abandoned properties and you renovate them. One property is in Lekki, one in Festac, one in Mushin. So you get the gist. But you renovate the property whilst doing match 3. So we think of the word game as a global game. There's nothing about it that says it's African. It's just a game. We think about the Ludo game as a local game because obviously Ludo is popular within the market, and we can do more targeted advertising within that with that. And then we think of the property restoration game as a hybrid, so like a mixture of the two, taking like a well-known mechanic that we know that works and kind of like slapping an African narrative on it. And what we want to do is to kind of like see how those 3 games perform across similar audiences. And there's so many ways that we can analyze that. So we look at like player engagement, we look at player retention, we look at progression, we look at monetization, look at user interactions. And the expectation that I have is that those games are going to perform differently across different geographies. So we would do targeted ads within places like Nigeria, Canada, South Africa, Philippines, India, Pakistan, and then also Saudi Arabia. So we're going to do targeted ads across all of those regions. So the natural expectation is that the Ludo game would underperform in those kind of like tier 1 markets. So like Canada, Australia might underperform there. The word game might show a different behavior in those regions, but might underperform here. And then the hybrid game might, again, right? I can't tell you because I don't have the data. But this is the reason why we're going with this approach. Now, what amount of data do we need? Is it like 100,000 players? Is it 50,000 players? Is it 10,000 players? I think you already start to see the signal once you have like over 10,000 users, especially if you have 10,000 users across those different geos that I just spoke about. You start to see that. So what really defines it for us is, like if we take it outside of the game, is looking at the kind of like cost per install, so how much it costs us to acquire a user, and then what the lifetime value of that user is. And this is back to Michael's point around we might have a lot of players here, but we don't have a lot of payers. And for us to run a game studio, we need to have sustainable revenue. So ultimately, what that data tells us is what types of game we should be making in the future, which I think is going to be a fusion of all 3 things. So global, as you said earlier, I think is what it is. But we are using first-party data to determine what direction we should go.
Thank you. So, similar question, but I'll tweak it a little. So, so clearly, I'm the youngest in this industry, versus the people on the panel. And when I interacted initially with some game developers, their games were developed based on, oh, this is the kind of game I like this is what I want to make. Not a lot where it didn't sound like a lot was driven by data, versus what Hugo has explained based on his experience and what the studio is currently doing. Do you find that to still be the case, or are people now embracing data to plan what types of games they release locally or on the continent?
Yeah, it was the same thing I experienced when I got in. I mean, they were before anything just game programmers, right? So at Africa Communicate, we run 2 fellowship programs. One is the Spark and the Hack program. The Spark is for people who want to get these skills and join the industry, like newbies or creators. Whilst the ARC is for the game studio founders to learn how to run sustainable businesses. So we take them through, it's a pre-accelerator. We don't have the funds for acceleration. So we take them through an entrepreneurial program for about 6 months where they are learning the business side of the sector. They're getting connected with global stakeholders and learning. And one thing we've been pushing is for them to be data driven. And we've already seen that in some studios. For example, the game studio, Dash Studios, they built the game nouns based on data. They did a lot of research. They spoke to stakeholders from King before they even started building that game. And the game is what we call Animal Place and Things. That game we play on paper. And they built the game, the digital version nouns, and that's like a big hit for them right now before they moved on. So that's one way data, because even when you're running a startup or a business, you have to go and do your market research. And until now, most people were driven by, oh, I love this game. I want to build a version of this game, my own version of this game. Or I have this idea I want to follow. But now people are actually using data to back those decisions. Another thing studios are doing right now is also looking at market opportunity, not just data. So as we know, to run a studio, you need revenue, you need funding to be sustainable. So be it a certain agenda that is being propagated globally or an opportunity. Say, for example, why do you think most studios are now creating culturally themed games? It's because they know there's a market for this or there's funding opportunity for this. So if, let's say, for example, there's a funded opportunity to create something about the Yoruba culture, we're beginning to see more and more African game studios go and create games around that so they can go for that. We're seeing that with climate change as well. We're seeing that with education as well. So in these cases, it's not just the data of Africans or people are playing climate change game. There's a market opportunity for you to build games in this context and actually make social impact and generate revenue. So these are the two ways I'm seeing studios going, using the data of players or market opportunities to drive their decisions.
All right. So in terms of really breaking into this international market, one of the problems you've highlighted is funding. Clearly, I'm sure that's not news. Hopefully, that's not news to anyone. Hugo, what other issues do we have? I know initially you had mentioned talent and the fact that we don't have a video games, I suppose, pipeline from an education perspective. What other issues need surmounting?
Yeah, so I think mine kind of like sits in the middle. I think that obviously you need people who can make these games, and then obviously you need money to be able to get these games to market. But in the middle of that is actually experience, which is not quite people who can make the games or the money. I mean, money buys you experience, but also making great games also buys you experience, right? So there are two ways to go about it. And the reason why experience is the thing is that, you don't know what you don't know. Like you have like the known unknowns and you have the unknown unknowns. The known unknowns is what you think you don't know, but there are things you know that you don't even know. And I think that that's really what it is. And again, like I said, like I've been privileged to be in other ecosystems. And like, this is not just, okay, so somebody posted a picture in a group that you and I are in. And in that picture, it shows like somebody climbing a hill, right? And then that they had this caption like, "This is what game development looks like," and it was like a really, really steep hill. And then when the person got to the top of the hill, there was another mountain that was like 3 times the size of the one they were climbing before. And this is what marketing a game looks like. And I think like the misconception is that, like I would make a great game and that game is going to become a market success. And, that is further from the truth, like way beyond. Like the only reason why we can even do remotely the things that we're able to do is because of the number of people that we have. And, like we have disciplines that a year ago we did not have. And we're building disciplines in areas that we didn't even have before. So if I just use data as an example, most people think about data as a function that just focuses on like data analysis. But it's not just data analysis in terms of analyzing. So you have monetization experts, you have UA experts, you have level designers, like then you have your data analysts. These are like 4 different people doing the same function or similar function. And you're not just tracking in-game data, you're also tracking data across all the different channels where you're trying to acquire users and which one is actually sending you high quality. So all users are not the same, right? You can pay some OEM or some telco money and they'll say, oh, we'll bring you 10 million users, right? They will give you 10 million real people, but those are not even people that you, like somebody will give you 10 or give you 100 and that 100 is better than that 10 million, right? Now, the sophistication to track that kind of data is not something that most of us understand or know, right? And that's just one. And then something else is kind of like tracking in-game activity. So like tracking people within the game itself. And then looking at conversion points. So like somebody's playing your game, playing, right? At what point will they start to pay? And how can you make them pay? And do you even stop them from playing? Say, bro, you've enjoyed enough. Pay something. Do you understand? If you don't want to pay, be going. Because you've stayed there. It's like someone coming to and watch a movie for free. At some point, you turn off the thing and just say, the petrol don't finish. Go to your house, right? Because how many you watch 3, you now still want to watch 4th one. It's enough, right? So, ultimately, the only way that we can continue to make games is by generating revenue. And the toolkit that we go to, it's like going to war, right? Going to a gunfight with a straw, not even a knife, right? With a straw. What are you going to do with that, right? Or with a toothpick, right? So like that's pretty much the space that we're in because the people that we're up against are fully armed, like to the T. And I think that is what I mean by the unknown, is that most of us don't know what the people we're up against have. Like we don't even know what they have. And we think that, oh, it's about competing globally. Like we don't even know what that means in reality. So, it goes back to my point around talent development. So just because somebody's a data analyst doesn't mean that they're a good data analyst for games. Just because someone's a programmer doesn't mean they're, it's a mindset. That's really what it is. It's a mindset thing, right? Because the way that we analyze data, the way that we track data, what we do with that data, right, also matters. Because that is not the difference between somebody who analyzes data and says, oh, this person spent 3 hours, right? What we do with that data is, okay, have they paid, right? If they spend 3 hours, should they be paying, right? Did we ask them to pay? How many times within that 3 hours, how many times do we ask them to pay, right? Did they reject every single time we ask them? That's mindset because someone just, I'm not doing, you just, that too much question. But that's what we do, is to track every single action and then say, okay, if this person has stayed here for this long and we have to ask them this many times, right? And each time they say no, we need to increase the frequency at which we ask them to the point that every action they do is, would you pay? Would you pay? Because it's kind of like telling you, please be going, right? We don't want your business.
They're going to get frustrated like the lady in front for township.
I mean, like I said, so this is now the business side of games, right? If somebody spent, let's say, 10 hours playing your game, right? And they haven't paid once, and they are not interested in paying, do you need them to continue playing your game? It's not an open. I'm just saying. I mean, obviously, but you can also change that from 10 hours to 20 hours. You can change it from 20 hours to 50 hours. But the point is, these are like triggers. These are like touch points that we would institute, and we do all manner of like analysis. So we'll do like A/B test. We'll do one group 15 hours, we'll do another group 30 hours, we'll see how people react. We can also do cohort analysis, so we'll only expose it to like a small segment of our users to kind of like see if they get annoyed. That's when people will now start leaving comments in your app saying like, you people have changed strategy, blah, 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 blah. You can also do focus groups. You can also get some of your users in and say, okay, why people not paying? They say, we have too much currency now, what are we paying for? Everything that we already have we're already transacting, there's no incentive for us to pay. So like that's, yeah.
Yeah, so with what you've said and the unknown unknowns, right? It's, people in the audience might kind of hear and think, where are we going to start trying to fight in this global space? But I know there have been a few success stories on the continent, for example. And to your point first, actually, there's a small studio. I'm trying to, their name actually, the president, the Meccan Games in Kenya. They have about 5 or 6 people in the studio, and the publisher has got like 30 people on their account marketing, to your point about the hills and the Triple Mountain. And so we have some success stories like that with games that have over 23 million users globally, as an example. And I think it's going to spike again now based on the current political or not. So take them off the planet. Yeah. So other success stories on the continent that we've seen that have broken through the international ranks. Are there any that you can think of?
Well, financially wise, we're getting there. I think we can call Ugo.
We have to call. What do you mean? We have to call Ugo. For those who do not know, Rising Chef, the Disney mobile game, was also created by Malio Games. So yes, it's yeah.
Definitely.
Yes.
Iwaju, Rising Chef. You should check that out. You definitely should. So yeah, so financially wise, I think we're getting there. More and more studios are eating that. I know Virago is doing quite a lot.
Yeah.
Honest Chronicles, they are doing very well, very very well. And then for the others, success is now not just what is made in terms of revenue. Success is getting global recognition. Success is getting funding to complete the game. I saw the latest update of what Dimension 11 is building, and it was really impressive. Even Hero in Kenya as well has gone on to hire and Andrew, to see how they can improve their development and all. And their studios now getting support to go. There's a studio currently in Germany at the Rabbit Residency. So success for these studios based on their stages and being able to meet those new milestones is really different. And financially as well, I think we are getting really closer. One thing I just want to add to what Ugo said with what is missing as well is, I think for us, exactly what he said, I'll just reiterate in a different way, is we're missing an industry, right? We are mostly filled with game programmers. That is what a bulk of us are. All of us are building. If you ask us any question, it's the game. It's the game. We need people from the finance side. We need people from the legal side, from the marketing side, from the community side. This is what is missing. And what this has resulted in the sector is it's only those studios that have the resources and the exposure. Only those studios are able to stay at the forefront and build that ecosystem for themselves. But if we really want to see our industry grow and move further, look at the music industry. Not everybody is an artist, right? They have so many people. Look at the movie industry. We have people that are focused on the dressing, the clothes. If you come to the games industry and say you want to focus on attire,
You'll be hungry.
yeah, so this is what we are missing, but that is changing. And I think the more we do that, the more we build an ecosystem around our sector, the more we'll be able to go. Because there's so many things we really don't know. And lately we've been trying to do everything ourselves, in-house, and there's only as much as we can do. But when we have these other sectors, these other professionals, like look at Meccan Success, if they didn't have a global publisher, really, even with the game, if they build the game to that same level, would they be where they are today? So that's something we are looking to see happen in our sector. That's something I know can push us further to do more. Yep.
Okay, thank you. So your point about collaboration or exposure or stuff like that, I'm going to just tag on to that. So outside of making our own games that we're kind of really focused on, for this question, can we explore conversations around co-development, outsourcing as a pathway for global to kind of get involved in this global success for the games industry? Yeah, Hugo, co-development and outsourcing.
You know, I'm not a big fan of co-development, of
I know.
outsourcing.
I know.
So, just for those of you who don't know, outsourcing essentially is where a production house asks a local studio in Nigeria to help them with art or help them with some bit of engineering or UI or do QA, do play testing. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just it's based on something called a man-month rate. So you essentially charge for every single person. So essentially they're outsourcing their functions. So like if you hire 10, they'll hire 10 people. No, you would hire 10 people for them. They will pay you. You pay those people. When they're done, like you play on your own. So I think it's not sustainable. So funny enough, I was in Finland last week, and we had people from India, people from South America, and then a few people from Africa who were part of that delegation that was there. And the South Americans have this issue. So unlike other regions, they don't have a lot of like independent studios making their own IP. But they have studios who have been doing outsourcing work for like 30 years, 40 years on the biggest IPs you would ever know. And whenever they try to do their own thing, they either get acquired, right? Or they get given like, here's a lucrative $20 million deal for the next 5 years. Don't try it, right? So they've never been able. There's not one studio in South America who has done a breakout game, not that I know of. But they have multiple billion-dollar businesses there, right? So I think it's a trap. That's why I stay away
It's a
from
billion-dollar trap.
I like the
Million,
trap.
million.
I like the trap.
All right, all right, all right.
I like the trap.
Me, I stay away. I stay away from it.
So this is it's anyway.
Oh yeah. Just another example is what Microsoft did with what is that their developer team, the Africa developer
ADC. Yes.
ADC, right? Just like that, they shut it down. That's the problem with it. Just like that. Oh, we're cutting staff. We're cutting 10% of our staff globally, and they just shut you down. And then loads of people become unemployed very quickly, right? So it's a mindset, right? And if your mindset is the only way to survive is by getting these deals, then that's all you do, and that is the problem that the Brazilian studios have. They know it.
Yeah. So globalization. So yes, do you want to go? Yeah, go on.
Yeah, and yeah, it can be a problem. But when you look at our population, I mean, that's how Andela positioned Nigeria and Africa for tech, right? Literally outsourcing, because not all of us are going to have a game studio, and of those that would have a game studio, less more is going to have a successful game studio. Now, why I do like that approach is because if you even look at the studio joint play games currently in Finland, it was formerly Nukema Interactive. And they were building lots of games as well. But how did they manage to keep their team for up to like 5 years still working with them? They were getting contracts and jobs and getting paid, and they were using that to sort out expenses and then work on their own IP. The thing is, each founder's goal or vision, they now have to really structure it and ensure that you can balance. There is actually another game studio now in Nigeria. They've tried to fundraise, and investors are like, no, we won't give you money. But what they are doing now is they are working for global studios, and they are using that money to now hire locally and build. But beyond even the funding part, I think the most exciting thing for me is I've worked with lots of African game developers that have worked on global projects. Their skill, that experience gap, they actually have it. So the only issue now is because they now become very good at being programmers or developers, for them to now become studio founders, because that's a totally different ball game. So perhaps we need more of these experienced people to keep on growing in their skills, keep on building. And then perhaps if there's funding, definitely, I've spoken with a lot of them, they are really interested in saying, okay, how can they work for a local studio? But the issue that is there is always our structure in local studios. It's not properly set up for these people to work in. But that skill gap we have, because it is the creative industry. And in the creative industry, it's the more you work, the more you have experience. And the kind of project you work is what would expose you to that extra skill you are looking to get. Yeah, so that's why I'm up for it, because we have a game developer working for Azure Games right now. That's like one of the biggest publishers. And when he's talking, he's saying things that I can't even imagine. right? He has worked on projects that when I see them, my mind is blown. These are the kind of people that will most likely make those high-end games of tomorrow. But now we can't afford them. So we keep on looking to build a structure that they can come back to.
I think that's a great point. That the more you do, the more you learn. So outsourcing, for example, is roughly about $12 billion industry versus the 180, well, games global industry, and it's a subset of that. So to Hugo's point, for life-altering money, generation-changing money, nation-building money, IP, trying to get that IP that becomes a big hit should remain in focus, and so that we don't go back to slavery and slave trade. But we can walk and chew gum. Yes. So for now,
We need
for
to
now,
survive to make that money.
yes, to make that money, for us to be there when that time comes. All right. Any questions from the audience, please? In front first. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Brenda. I'm with the British Council. I really enjoyed this panel.
Oh, thank
Just
you.
wanted to say that first, because I've been ignoring gaming, but I came today just to just to listen, and get it. And I think I have a small idea now. My question is to you, Hugo. First of all, what is the adjacent industry amongst the creative verticals that can work with you? First. Second, there must be some sort of formula that you've worked out on how you can be successful at it. You need to share a little bit, please. And I think the third thing I wanted to ask was, is there a mapping for gaming? Has anybody mapped, and when I say mapped, even the entire value chain, who is the biggest, all of those things. I know you said you did some research, yeah. I don't mind if you can point us to that, and then I'll talk to you after the panel.
Sorry, just before you answer, just to say, a lot of us have been trying to reach the British Council, but that's an aside. That's an aside by email. No, but that's an aside. But it's good you are here now.
But you know the
Let
reason why
bygones
now.
be bygones.
You know the reason why now. She said they've been ignoring gaming, so like they. So the report that we did does cover the value chain. Does look at the history of the African video games going back to 1990. So it does map that out very well. Size is always relative because it depends on what you're measuring. So we didn't do size, but we do spotlights of studios in each region. So it's really helpful. It's Africa Games, AfricaGamesReport.com. But I can send it to you. Madam can also send it to you. Your first question was
Parallel adjacent industry.
oh yeah, so animation and comic I think are pretty low hanging fruits right there. It does irritate me that we haven't done anything with any animation studio here. I don't know why, but everybody's chasing paper. That's number one. Number two is that I guess a lot of people do service work, and that is also part of the reason why collaboration is tough. Because if you remember what I said about service work, which is based on man month, you can't then assign that one person.
Why are you
to
pointing to me when you're saying?
No, because you are for it. You are for it. You are for it.
I'm so for it, for the growth of the youth on this continent.
But it's a trade-off, right? It's a trade-off because that creative expression is hampered, right? And I think that when you talk about the secret sauce, that we figured out, is that so I sent an email to my team last week and I tried to kind of share with them what we're playing for and the risk that comes with it. And at the end of that email, I said to them, imagine, what would it look like if we fail, right? So we shoot for the moon and we fall short, which is back to this whole, we run out of funding, we're out of jobs, right? but imagine if we succeed. And I think like that's it, right? Because ultimately, what do we want? We want to be able to do what we love, and we want to do it now on our own terms, right? If we have a breakout success, I've been with studios who have, like printing machines in their basements, right? And they can do whatever they want, right? Like in gaming, we can have, that's what the music artists can do, right? Like with their big hits, they can sing whatever they want, right? Why can't we do that with games? And if we were in a position where we could make whatever games we want and money wasn't a thing, right, what games would we make? And that for me is the North Star. And I always shoot for the North Star, right? Like I would rather shoot for the North Star and miss it. I might as well not, I might as well go work at, like one of the banks, right? Like what's the point? So you asked me what my secret sauce is, and that is my secret sauce, if you can decipher it.
All right. Art as well, although comics I think covers that, but art is a really strong part of the adjacent industries as well. Any other question, please?
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All protocols duly observed. I keep hearing Play Store, games on Play Store, right? I stand to be corrected. But is there any Nigerian game on like the PS5, the PS4, Sega and all? Because as a gamer, I only see those abroad, like the FIFA, God of War, but I've not seen a Nigerian game. Like I said, I stand to be corrected. I've not seen a Nigerian game on the consoles.
Okay. Do you want to take it, or should I?
Yeah, I could. Yeah. So we have a lot being built for, especially Xbox, if I'm not wrong. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a lot being built for Xbox currently. And if you look at the African context, I think we have Orion, the Orion, yes, by Kiro Games from Cameroon on Steam already, and they're also on Xbox as well currently. So that's also because before that, I mean, even right now, Africa is seen as a mobile first market. If you ask almost everybody in the room, where do you play games on your mobile phone, right? And so these also helped a lot of game developers look at, okay, if I want to take charge of this market, I need to look at mobile first. And then when you're building for consoles and the likes as well, it takes a lot more. It might look like you're just building the same game, but it takes a lot more. Legends of Orisha, for example, that's a game that's going to be on Xbox. I think they're getting PS5 as well. They've been in development for 4 years plus right now, right? So, and they are working towards it. So we have more studios. I know Deluxe Creation Studios is working on the Chike in the metaverse. That game is going to go on Xbox and Steam as well. There are more and more games. Bison's game, The Saints, just recently released on Steam. So we have those games out there, and we don't have a lot like that. If you go to the South African market, there's a lot more of such games on those platforms, Steam and Xbox and the likes. But it's a developing market. It's an area where more and more game developers are looking at. But we've always been mobile first, pro mobile first, because when you look around you, most people are playing games on their phone.
Also, when you look at the global games market, it's driven in growth by mobile. So it's not just us, actually. In terms of even global revenue, mobile is probably 49% or something. So mobile is the largest bit of that pie, and it gives Africans access, so to speak, in terms of the explanation, to be able to at least compete on a certain level. Yeah. Plus, it requires, I suppose, less in terms of manpower and resourcing, possibly, to deliver.
Just to add to that, so if you think about what we said earlier about the developer community locally, right? It's a fraction. We talked about the lack of experience within that. Platforms like Xbox and PlayStation essentially are more tailored for AAA big production. So it's like Hollywood. That's what they're designed for, right? It's Hollywood production, not Nollywood, not Bollywood, Hollywood production. The other thing to also bear in mind is consumer market. So like those platforms we typically look at like where people own consoles and people pay for products on consoles, and they look at it from a volume standpoint. And this goes back to kind of like idea of like what types of games do you make. So when you speak about Legends of Orisha, Orion, even what Dean is making, Hero, these are all cultural games for Xbox. But the reality is the player population for those types of cultural games is quite small. So it's a big gamble. And then unlike mobile platforms where you can self-publish, these other platforms you can't just go on there and just submit your game for publishing. You need to have a dev kit. They need to send you a dev kit. And just to give you context, there's an Xbox representative here in Lagos in the Microsoft office here. For them to get a dev kit to Nigeria takes 6 months. And they cannot send it to their Microsoft office. They have to send it to your address, which means they have to DHL it. And all of that is written off in Seattle at their HQ. So just to give you the development kit to enable you to even test the game that you're building takes 6 months. If you compare that to mobile, it's just your mobile phone, right? And you can self-publish. So it's quite complex, and that's the reason why. But please feel free to come and invest in one of the studios that I'm making for the platform, or come and join us and help us to put one on there. Because we need business people like you to make a point and say, you people must have it there, right? The more people shout, hopefully they'll start listening.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. It's a wrap.
Please stand for photographs.